So thank you and good afternoon. Hopefully you can hear me in this rather interesting environment. But if you can't, just put your ears up or something and I'll speak up a bit. But thank you for coming, thank you for listening. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the digital effect, the effect of digitization on everything that we do now. And of course, the expanding version of that we're going to see over the next few years as the Internet of Things, which we're hearing so much about here in the conference, starts to hit us. So the important thing to say, of course, is that when we start, that by the Internet itself, the growth of the Internet still continues. It's not like the Internet is stopping. The effect it's had over the last number of years has been absolutely incredible, as we know, over the last 25, 30 years almost now. The Internet has changed everything. And we know that we're still getting many, many people connected to. Over the next 5 years, we expect to see another billion or so, 1.1 billion people connected to the Internet. And about 2019 is when we'll see the tipping point of over 50% of the world's population connected to the Internet. So that, of course, provides and has provided hugely significant opportunities, applications, services that we've all become very used to, the eBays and the Googles and so on, that have just become part of our lives, which we couldn't really have predicted before the Internet happened. There's no way we could have built the Internet just so the eBay would have worked. But of course, once we had eBay, innovation happened. We got, once we had the Internet, should I say, innovation happened with things like eBay, Google, Facebook, etc., which potentially allowed us to do things. And I think the same will be true in the next generation of the Internet. The reality, of course, is that that change has changed many, many industries, but it's still continuing to do so. And if you look at a few of these examples here of some of the more notable ones that are getting all the news at the moment, people like Uber, for example, a taxi company that doesn't own any taxis, $40 billion market capitalization, an amazing organization that's built entirely on a digital platform. We're even now seeing the effect of various descriptions of Uber effects like Uberization or Uberpreneurs now. Uberpreneurs is people who are actually doing things in their taxis while they're doing a taxi journey. There's one notable one in New York recently who earns, I think, about $20,000 a year as a taxi driver and earns over $200,000 a year selling jewelry to people who come into his taxis by handing out a brochure and while they're traveling, bit of a captive audience. So we're starting to see people who are innovating on top of that basic platform. And of course, people like Airbnb as well. Airbnb now with more hotel rooms or more rooms on rent than Hilton and Hyatt put together. So a completely fundamental change of the rules. That change of the rules is what digitization is about. It's about saying the digital effect that your competitor will have on you or you'll have to yourself is something you have to think about as a company now. And if you look at these examples here, not just with Airbnb and Uber, but people like Square as well, who are the little point of sale environment where you can plug into your iPhone, scan people's cards and so on without having a POS system. Or even Tesla. Tesla Motors, the electric car created by Elon Musk. Tesla is an entirely open source car, or will be soon. He's been going to give away all of the IP from Tesla to actually create a much bigger market so that he can then compete further in it, which is very much like the software and digital industries. So completely different challenges happening. And if you look at these kind of industries and the way that they're changing, I think we're seeing that almost every industry has been touched in some way or another. Obviously, the notable ones like music and movies and so on, we saw a number of years ago. But obviously, people like Uber who have fundamentally changed the taxi business in many countries. I think there are 11 cities in India alone who have Uber in them, and some 50-odd cities around the world, fundamentally changing the way that transport happens. The result of that, of course, is that, as predicted many times, and I think we would see this as potentially even a conservative estimate, is that around 40% of the Fortune 500 companies potentially won't exist in the next 10 years unless they digitize themselves. That digitization means actually changing, so it's the principle of compete or be competed against. If you look at the supermarket industry here in the UK, highly competitive, we're seeing the ones who are thriving are the ones who have a strong omni-channel capability, the ability to work on the internet, to work on offline, to work in the store, and to blend that all together, particularly on mobile devices. And most of the retailers you talk to around the world will tell you that the 2007, 2008, when the iPhone came around, was when everything changed for them. People started to take things in a much more personal fashion. We're looking for the ability to actually deliver capabilities to individuals rather than to the basket, to the trolley, as we'd seen in the past. So we're seeing a huge change in the world of retail, and we're seeing almost every company being affected. So if you don't see now your industry or the industries you work with being affected by digital, you're probably going to see it in the next 5 to 10 years. And probably the most notable one is government. Most government services have only just scratched the surface of being digitized. And that ability to not only improve the customer aspect of what you do, but everything you do in the back end, your supply chain, the way you run your buildings, the way you manage your people, the facilities you have, where you store your data and so on, is something that's going to affect most industries. And of course, again, if you look at retailers, their ability to compete against Amazon is pretty tough. Amazon built from the ground up as a digital platform. Of course, most others with huge amount of legacy to deal with and systems that they have to manage to even give you even vaguely the experience that you get on some of the online platforms. So huge amounts of disruption. You'll be disrupted or you will disrupt over the next number of years. And of course, that disruption's become a really hot topic. But at the moment, you know, the most likely competitor is actually around already for you. And if you haven't seen them, they're probably sitting in the wings at some point. So the result of that, of course, is that big change is happening in other companies. So you probably, I can't probably hear very much from what you're saying, but maybe you'd like to take a guess in your own mind of what all these companies have in common. Well, they use Cisco. That's probably a good guess, yeah. But that wasn't actually the answer. The real answer is that they've all got a chief digital officer or a chief digitization officer, a job title which probably didn't exist a few years ago. So these companies are now saying that the digital transformation that they have to undergo is a fundamental part of what they're doing. So how do you actually start to change your company to think differently by digitizing it? If you're a Tesco or an AXA or a McDonald's or an eBay, all very, very different companies, but all with people who understand that digitization is fundamentally changing their business. We also see from Gartner, who are obviously influencing many of the organizations around, the change to digital as well. If you look at the top 10 strategic technology trends in 2015 for Gartner, you know, digital business is the overarching theme. We see major businesses changing and disrupting their business models. And really that whole principle of not only the connected of Internet of Things, but of disrupting, digital disruption is fundamentally at the root of what most companies' strategies are looking at now. So digitization, right at the heart and the key of everything that's happening at the moment, and many great examples of organizations who are starting to digitize themselves, who are actually fundamentally changing the customer experience. And how many of you now know, with all your mobile devices that you're sitting with today, are expecting the experience of almost any company to be seen through your mobile phone? So a powerful force going through all of business at the moment, and something we see, you know, validated by many of the research organizations like Gartner. But the possibilities continue to grow as you connect people. So as you connect people together and you start to have models of peer-to-peer sharing, we've obviously seen Airbnb is a good example of that, where people share their houses, they give people access to their properties to rent them out. We've seen many of the peer lending environments growing enormously over the last number of years. But we're seeing that Uberization, that digitization of many platforms. You know, you could imagine a postal service where you hand something to you because you happen to be going to to Scotland today, and I trust you to actually take that for me. And of course, the ability to rate people, to give them a sense of security of what they're doing. In the same way, again, you say in Airbnb, any of you have used Airbnb, you have to put your driving license or your passport on to ensure you are who you are. You have to record a video to ratify who you are. And then, of course, you're rated as someone who rents a property, but also someone who's renting a property out. So everybody's rated. It's a self-managing system. That ability, when people get connected, is very, very powerful. And we see all sorts of opportunities. I've seen applications recently for people who are losing mobile devices, for example. And we know there are some of those around on Apple, for example, has one itself. But this one's a peer-to-peer basis that says you volunteer that if somebody's near you who has a Bluetooth device that's lost, that it will beacon you and you'll actually tell the owner that the device is somewhere near you. Very different business models. And when you start to think about that kind of power, that enabling of people to change business models, then very different things can happen. So we see huge opportunities in the continued digitization of the market, but we see that get even more so now when we start to move into the world of things. So I'm sure you've heard from here, people around here talking about the connected world. We see IoT from Korea there. We see it all over the stands. The connection of digital things. By 2019, there'll be 24 billion devices in the world with an IP address. So connectable on the network, where the network can actually talk to those devices. 24 billion. So that, and for every one person that joins the internet, there'll be at least 10 things connecting to the internet. And that's actually going faster in the UK than it is anywhere else around the world at the moment. So we're actually connecting more things to the internet than anybody else. We've already seen in the UK, it's got the highest density of cameras, security cameras than anywhere in the world. We'll see more and more of that happening. In the UK, the number of IP devices will double to somewhere around 615 million by the year 2019. With a population of some 50 million, that's quite a lot of devices. And we expect, of course, the corresponding speed of the networks to change. We expect the average speed of the network to be up around 50 megabits by 2019. Now, if that was true in my house, that would be great, where I get roughly about 2 meg downstream and a couple hundred K upstream, but I'm sure the 50 meg will reach me as well. But now that capability, that connection of everybody to everything is something that's fundamentally changing the world. Because we know that by 2019, again, 40% of all the data in the world will come from sensors. So not from you inputting stuff into your website, not necessarily from you making phone calls or even the video that's on the network, but the data that's actually coming from sensors. So everything from traffic lights to heart rate monitors to wearable devices and so on. We're going to see a huge amount of increase in that. And at that point, you again start to change models. I saw some really good examples recently of the use of data when it starts to come to that degree. I don't know if anybody's aware of the Open Data Institute in the UK. Open Data Institute? A few people. So have a check out the website, the ODI. It's funded by Innovate UK, the organization I'm chair of. And what ODI does is it encourages us to free up data. So some great applications here in London. If you've not traveled around London much, download City Mapper. Fantastic application, which gets you around anywhere in London, taxis, buses, Boris bikes, whatever you want. Tells you when the next bus is, tells you when the next underground is, etc. City Mapper, based on open data. So the data for Transport for London has been completely opened out and allowed developers to innovate on that information. And City Mapper is a great example of that, developed here in London in the tech cluster we have here. But there are other great examples as well. If you look on the ODI website, you'll see a great example of some drug diagnosis that was done. So if you look at all, this is not necessarily sensor-based data, but if you look at the data from the prescription of statins, the drug that's used for cardiovascular issues, if you look at the prescription of statins in the UK and you analyze the data to see whether people have used generic statins, cheaper statins, or branded statins, expensive ones, which can be sometimes 50, 60 times as expensive. If you'd actually prescribed generic ones, which is what can be handled for most cases, on that one drug alone, we could have saved over £200 million a year for the NHS. So when you start to get data, whether that be from sensors or from behavioral information, interesting things can start to happen when you analyze that data with big data analytics. Other great examples are things like the England Rugby Sevens team who train down at Twickenham. And if you watch the Horizon program from a few months ago, it gives a great example of the England Rugby Sevens team where the guys are all wearing heart rate monitors and little accelerometers that sit in the back of their collars. And as they run around, of course, it monitors how much they're moving, which way they're leaning, what their heart rate's like, and so on. If you actually look at that data, and they've got a new young doctor in there who's taken all of that data, mashed it together and done some big data analysis on it, rather than analyzing every individual's performance when they score a goal. So what he's saying is, if I look at you and you happen to be running 5 meters, I know you're going to do that 10,000 times over the next 3 weeks. He can actually tell 2 days before you're going to get a cold that you're going to get it. 2 days before he's predicting it. And they've actually cut down in soft tissue injuries in the England Rugby Sevens team by 80% by predicting before people start to lean a bit heavier, for example, on a knee, that they need to get some physiotherapy on it, or that the back's starting to play up so their posture's not right. Very powerful information. You now imagine taking that information and looking at it from a health service perspective and saying, well, what could we do for people who are living in sheltered housing or in some kind of assisted living environment where you actually want to monitor them every day and make sure they're not going to fall because their knees hurting or their hips playing up. You could actually get doctors out, not only save a lot of suffering, but clearly save a lot of money as well. So huge examples when you start to gather data to really be able to do amazing things with it. But of course, from our perspective, that means that as all these devices get connected, that you then have the network itself acting as a sensor. So the network is touching everything. And the network itself can then make determinations, can actually look at behavioral patterns, can look at movements and so on, and do some very, very different things with it. So the Internet of Everything and the Internet of Things within that, so the Internet of Everything being the whole digitization effect, and the Internet of Things, the connection of all those many things, provides huge opportunities. The numbers vary, but from a Cisco perspective, we think that it's a value over the next 10 years of about $19 trillion of potentially market value that can be captured by either connecting people to the internet, connecting devices to the internet, and modifying the way that processes and operations work. A huge, huge opportunity, and something that every country, every company, and every organization is keen to capitalize on. And you'll hear today many discussions about whether the UK can lead in the world of IoT. We hear our friends in Korea investing heavily in it as well. We've seen Japan and many other countries putting lots of money, as well as the US, into IoT. But it is starting to happen here. If you look at the Land Securities, which is the biggest commercial property owner in the UK, with the Trinity Shopping Centre up in Leeds, they've already tried to connect it in much different ways as been done before. There's some great experiences, video experiences and things that can be done, but there's also monitoring as people move around using beacon technology to determine where they're moving within the shopping centre, give people access to lower queues than they might deal with otherwise, monitor behaviour as people move around the shopping centre. The escalators are connected, the lighting's connected, and all of this allows them, in the £350 million development they have there, to manage people much more effectively and to move people around and give them a better experience within the shopping centre. The interactive video walls allow people to tweet and to monitor what's going on. But overall, what it does is it improves the efficiency of the organisation. So it runs better, reduces costs, and it attracts more customers, which of course is entirely what the business model is about in this case. So In the UK, as I said already, 10 times the value of devices, or 10 times the number of devices will be connected as people over the next number of years. And in the UK, about 48% of all connected devices will be in the machine-to-machine space. Now, the reason, of course, the machine-to-machine is becoming more viable is because the cost of sensors and the cost of processing has gone down enormously. Back in 2002, you could get about 2 million transistors per dollar of chip. Now you can get over 19 million transistors per dollar. So the cost profile has completely changed in just the last few years, which potentially allows you to do many things that you could never have imagined before. The cost profile of sensors being embedded into clothes, or being embedded into cars, or being embedded into buildings is much lower, and so potentially new business models can emerge which allow you to monitor those through the life of their usage. And of course that does different things. If you imagine cars, I mean, most cars have already got, certainly your average BMW has probably got between 100 and 200 million lines of code in it already. It is essentially a software device. And that software device has lots of capability to tell the rest of the network about what it's doing. I actually have a BMW. I crashed one of them 2 years ago now. And before I rang the police to tell them I crashed, they actually told me the car had already called them, told them my GPS location, so which was very nice. The police still weren't coming out, which was somewhat disappointing, but nonetheless, it had told them where I was. But you know, the car is much, much smarter. And as you look at the kinds of things that cars can start to tell you, there's no reason why cars shouldn't start to tell you that that it's raining, for example. So how many cars have got the windscreen wipers on? How many people are braking? How many have put their aircon on because the temperature's risen? So a much finer granularity of information than we can gather at the moment if we have sensors in devices like cars all around the world. Very, very powerful capability for us throughout the whole of the ecosystem. But of course, this is something that a company like Cisco, or even any of the folks in here, can't do on their own. This is about building an ecosystem. So the world of partnership is probably going to multiply itself many times over the next few years, where Cisco and every other company is going to have to partner with smaller companies and other big companies to really build an innovation system which will deal with the IoE. The way we've done that is through an initiative we call the Big Initiative in the UK, where we've got a series of innovation centres, one down in Shoreditch, it's part of Tech City, where we actually have a set of startups that we host down there who are actually developing applications, some of them relating to us, some to do with the IoT, some to do with IoE in general, retail applications, sensor applications, shopping applications, and movement location tracking applications, all based in our center down there. So this is small companies that we are nurturing and supporting because we understand the bigger system that has to be built to create this. And then we have another innovation center over in Hackney where we're developing services jointly with universities, looking at things like connected lighting services or connected station services, the services you might have when you're in a train station, an airport, or a bus station. So lots of capabilities we're doing in there. And then, you know, the lighting as a service capability, this ability to manage lighting based on security issues, whether there's people around, whether you want to save energy. Many of the local authorities spend huge amounts of money on running lighting systems, transferring those to LEDs and then making them smart, which detects when people are close, switching off lights when they're not needed, but switching them on when they are needed, if you're walking home at night from a train station, for example. So very, very smart capabilities, and something that's entirely based on a set of partners and ecosystems we're building. But of course, there are many challenges when you try to do this as well, and I'd be the first one not to minimize the challenges of privacy, or legislation, or regulation, or trust. So we have to be very focused on how we deliver not only all this capability and functionality for the Internet of Everything, but how we actually make it an environment that people want to work in, or want to live in, or want to play in. So it's changing all over, and I think the challenges of whether we have the right skills, which we're going to talk a bit about later, whether we can even authenticate. Imagine you have a heart rate monitor or a pacemaker device connected now to the internet. I mean, how do you upgrade the software on it? How do you know that it's your heart rate monitor or your pacemaker that people are updating? How do you authenticate information? Very, very big questions that have to be answered. So the need for standards, the need for us to work together as a community is greater than it's ever been. Incredibly important that we actually work with throughout industry so that if you're in another country, it's not that your heart can't be monitored, but it can be monitored by anybody's device that they happen to place over it. So the need for standards, the need for commonality is going to be huge over the next number of years. So really important, we're right at the trying to drive this, and of course in the UK, lots of work being going on to both fund some demonstrators to show how the Internet of Things could work, and then to start working on standards, things like HyperCat, which is one of the standard efforts that's actually kicked off in the UK, funded by Innovate UK, to actually create standards for the Internet of Things. And of course then the very scale of what you're dealing with, and something that Cisco are very familiar with, has to be dealt with. How are we going to scale the Internet of Things with 50 billion devices, or 100 billion devices, or 1 trillion devices? How are we going to scale that? It's going to build networks which are very different than the networks we've built today. We can't afford to send all of the data back to the middle to be dealt with if you're handling maybe a traffic light system which has to react to some changes in traffic patterns. So we're going to be looking at concepts not only like cloud computing, but potentially fog computing as well, which is kind of cloud down at the lower level to actually handle more immediate data and to store data locally and handle decisions locally that have to be handled for real-time operational technologies like traffic management systems, for example. But of course, also we need those devices to be lower powered. They may only come on intermittently. They may only send data intermittently. And in those cases, we certainly need the mobile networks we have today, but we probably need the mobile networks we don't have today, the low power networks, the networks that maybe will handle tiny amounts of data on a regular basis, and then obviously the higher speed networks which will handle the bigger data over time. So a hugely different environment is something that we are very focused on inside Cisco, and I think in the industry in general. And then of course on top of that, security. There's no doubt about it that security is a big enough issue in today's world when we're talking about security on the current internet. And we believe that there are real necessities to take a holistic approach to security. You can't look at it as a whole series of point solutions. As soon as you do that, you find gaps that things can go through. Imagine that now 100 or 100 million times bigger than it is today on the Internet of Things, when you have to then try and authenticate your access to your car or your medical records or your information. Extremely important that security is built in from the ground up and part of everything that's done within the organization. So the reality is we are all in a challenge situation, and as we start to add more technology on, we have to build security right into the heart of everything we do. Because it is genuinely the #1 issue that we have to deal with. You know, that intelligence and trust is key. How can people trust the information you're giving from them? How can you trust that when you put information out onto the internet that it's going to be used for the purpose you want it to be used for? So a whole series of changes that are coming on, and of course that becomes much more important when it's the electricity power grid or something else that's happening. But there are huge opportunities. I mean, for example, if you look at cars again, £34 billion a year is spent in our transport system dealing with accidents, all right, dealing with car accidents. 90% of those car accidents are down to human fault, human behavior, human error. Imagine you could in some way automate that so that cars became autonomous. We see there's a trial already going on in Milton Keynes and a few others around the world trialing autonomous vehicles, which may potentially cut out a significant amount of human error. £34 billion a year in the UK alone caused by traffic accidents predominantly caused by human error. Now, there are huge numbers of things that need to be sorted in autonomous vehicles, but the capability is immense and something I think the prize is worth going for. But we have to recognize that things like security, when you're starting to authenticate a car, make decisions about traffic information, all have to be handled. And that's something that's vitally part of what we're building into the Internet of Everything. But of course, as data gets bigger, it creates more and more opportunities for us to do more and more. And of course, it creates new opportunities for jobs as well. Because over the next 10 years, there's going to be a series of jobs and skills that we probably don't even know we need today. Certainly things like data management or data management expertise, data analysis, skills which are only tiny today will become huge over the next 10 years or so. But blinded skills, like people who have got engineering capability as well as electrical or electronics and networking capability, we're going to see blended skills over the next years, a number of which are either not being taught today or certainly not being widely used. So a series of opportunities, I think, over the next number of years to do that. But, you know, and there are gaps. There's definitely already gaps in the security space. Probably 1 million people who were needed over the next 5 years in the security space. 2 million people in the ICT space. 40% of increase in the demand for data scientists. In the UK alone, over the next 5 to 10 years, we reckon there'll be a shortage of digital skills of around 1 million people. So for young people coming up today through school who may want to be lawyers or doctors or accountants, many of the real jobs and potentially the jobs that are part of every industry are going to be in the digital space. So a really great opportunity and something I think we need to continue to focus on. But beyond technical skills, yes, we of course want young people studying science, technology, engineering, and math. But we need people from all backgrounds as well. We need creative people. We need people who can innovate in generally. Those don't always come from STEM skills, but I think the blend and the great creativity we have here in the UK potentially is a great combination. So I'd like to see us nurturing skills overall in the community and something we see you know, that could potentially be very powerful in the next number of years. Now, we know that as young people develop, they obviously naturally have a lot of the digital skills, but there is still a bit of a boundary that has to be reached for people who maybe haven't quite got those digital skills. So we're not underestimating the fact that the generation gap is something we're going to have to work from over the next few years. And just to illustrate that, I got a short little video here, which just shows you maybe where some of the challenges might be over the next couple of years. Audio? Can we put the audio up?
Kommst du klar?
In German, but don't worry. So maybe a little bit to go. You maybe couldn't even see that. It's not particularly clear up there. Anyway, I'll not try and explain a joke. It's never a good thing to do. But I'd just like to leave you now with another video, which maybe illustrates a slightly more hopeful position for the future, and you know, see if this represents anything like the world today. So
this is the cat that drank the milk and let in the dog that jumped on the woman who brewed the coffee.
Brew coffee.
That woke the man who was late for work.
All right. I gotta go.
And drove the car.
Driverless mode engaged.
That found the parking spot.
Find parking space.
Parking space found.
That alerted the door. That opened the control room.
Hey, Bob.
That secured the data. That directed the turbines. That powered the sprinklers. That watered the grass. That fed the cow. That made the milk. That went to the store. That reminded the man to buy the milk. It was poured by the girl who loved the cat that drank the milk. The Internet of Everything is changing everything. Cisco, tomorrow starts here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got a few moments for questions if anybody's got any other comments, observations. There's some mics going around if anybody wants. Stick your hand up if you want to ask a question. So.
Hello. I'm speaking in the mind of a critical customer. Already now, I experience over there, and it's booth that internet does not work. And now we have less devices, less people, so how is that going to work?
Well, so let me just make sure I understood the question. So what you said was that you were over here now and the internet wasn't working here already, so how are we going to be when we had 50 billion devices on it?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Very good question. So the question was, if the internet doesn't work in the booth over here, which I'm not sure which one it was, but if it doesn't work over there, how's it going to work when you attach 50 billion devices? And that's a very good point, because clearly the internet is not only about quantity, it's about quality as well. And in fact, many of the metrics that governments have focused on for the last number of years has been, have we got people connected? What connection speed are they at? But most of us at home know that they don't get anywhere like the connection speed that you would expect to get. So there's still a long way to go. I completely agree in both building networks to the quality that we all expect and making those ubiquitous. I mean, how many of us have the experience now? You go to a hotel, they have free Wi-Fi, but it's not really worth using. It's so bad, you can't actually use it. So there's still a long way to go to upgrade networks to the quality that I think we need for general usage overall. But then, as you say, for the Internet of Things. Now, to be fair, on the Internet of Things, the amount of data we're sending is tiny. So it's probably not going to have quite the same problems you have when you're trying to log on to a web browser. But nonetheless, we need the quality. You need it to be consistent. You need to get there every moment and every day. So it's entirely possible to build great networks, and I'm sure you've had experiences where you've been on a network. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's perfectly possible to do it. But unfortunately, what happens in many circumstances is people build the absolute minimum, and they don't accommodate for the level. I mean, every one of you, I suspect, has got at least two mobile, an iPad, an iPhone, or some equivalent of those that you're actually using today. And many people are not building that. In fact, even when we built the network for the Olympics, because we were sponsors of the Olympics this in 2012, as we are next year, in fact, the Olympic network was 30 times the size of the Beijing network 4 years before. 30 times the size. And yet the first day when the young people arrived in the athletes' village, they completely melted the network, because every one of them got on and started sending videos around of the athletes' village of, look, here's where I'm staying. Now, we upgraded it very quickly and it was fine, but it shows you that even in a network that's built to the very highest quality, you can still go over capacity. So there's a long way to go. I think networks can still keep getting upgraded for many years, which is probably good for Cisco, but we do need to build them at quality and not just quantity, because I think a lot of it's been focused on how fast is my connection, not how good is my connection. And if we want to deliver public services like health, if you want to be able to call the doctor from home, you want perfect quality. You don't want a picture that cracks up when he says you're okay or you're not okay, or he's going through your results. It has to be perfect. So there's a long way to go for that, and it's a good point, and I think we need to do a lot more on that. So. There's a question here. Oh, question now.
Hello? Oh,
Hi.
sorry. Hi, my name's Jonathan Bomer. I've just accepted a place at Bournemouth University to do a master's in cybersecurity and human factors.
Good point.
And I'm here to find what would you say would be a direction for me to take research-wise? And if there's any potential sponsors, I'm looking for. What sort of stuff would you recommend I focus on? I come from a psychological background.
I think it's a great. So someone who's going to go and do a degree or do some research in cybersecurity and behavioural aspects, very, very powerful, because I think, I think cybersecurity itself, whatever you do, you're going to be gold dust, all right? Because as I say, there's loads of requirements for cybersecurity. But I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what cybersecurity is from a behavioural perspective. So how are people going to feel about putting all of their data onto the Internet of Things? If I could tell you that I might improve your lifespan by 10 years, would you be happy for me to connect you up full-time, all the time to the Internet? Probably not. You'd probably still be worried about how would that data be used? Is it private? Can that person, can I ensure that that data is actually being used in a particular way? So I think we're going to have to work on trust and privacy in a huge way. Now, that's not purely cybersecurity, but I think cyber wraps around that. But I think trust and privacy are the biggest things that will stop the UK market expanding and probably the global market if people don't feel comfortable about putting their information out onto the net. And as soon as you make that more personal, real personal data, then people get even worse about it. So I would be focused around that. I mean, that's a broad suggestion, but thank you. Another question here.
Michael Loring. Curious about that there was research has been done that the oversea cabling will last only for the next 5 years while we reach the limit.
The undersea cable?
Yeah. And capacity. And it goes further that by 2030, we already exceed the power consumption. To run the net, we actually use all the global power. Mm-hmm. How will you see that? But it's also, everything is related with heat as well.
So the question, just in case you didn't get it, was a question about fundamental capacity, so undersea cable capacity and then overall power capacity. Yeah? It's 2 questions. So, I mean, I think that I guess my faith in the undersea capacity is probably greater in the short term than energy. Because if you think of your home, I mean, at home, how long ago were we told that copper would only do to a maximum of 64 kilobits, and then it was going to do 1 meg, and then it was going to do 10 meg, and now they're talking about, 100 meg gigabit speed on copper. So, my brother's a laser fiber optic physicist who tells me that you can put all of the world's television and internet signals down one cable. However, the theory of that is great. The practice is obviously very different. So I think there's a long way to go, but I do think fiber's still got a lot of promise. I actually think we can probably get a lot more down fiber than we think we can today, and I think our innovation will help that. Energy is more difficult because the whole energy system is built today on a completely different model than it's actually being used. It's been built on a hierarchical model being generated from the center and distributed out to a series of users. But of course, just like the internet did, it went from exactly that model of hierarchy to a completely peer-to-peer model. And I think that has some real advantages because we know that energy can be much more efficiently used if it's handled in a peer-to-peer model, but the grid is not ready to do that yet. So I think it's a big challenge over the next few years for us to get to proper smart grids. I don't just mean smart meters, I mean smart grids that manage electricity effectively. Obviously, we have to try and reduce our requirement for electricity, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen quickly as we get more and more powerful chips. So I think the efficiency of the grid is going to be the big step forward over the next number of years. We're trying to do a lot of work in it. I know many others are, but it's a big job to do because it's an industry that takes 25 years of investment often to get to where it needs to get to. So, interesting. Thank you. Good question. I think I have to go now, but thank you very much, folks. Thank you.